doing the proper form and really getting to enjoy the sport as well without, this excessive concern over, how much weight you're doing that could potentially predispose you to an injury if, you have to sacrifice the mechanics of the movement. So really focusing on the mechanics of the movement is really important for that.
Hi, Ben. It's my pleasure to have you on the Evidence Strong show. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Alex. I appreciate you having me on. My name is Ben Carnovale. I'm a medical student at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. I'm also a research fellow in the Spine Computational Outcomes Learning Institute, or SCOLI, research lab under Dr. Nitin Agarwal and Dr. Kojo Hamilton. My previous background, also from the University of Pittsburgh, is in engineering, and my work focuses on bringing engineering and spinal outcomes research together to look how we can use biomechanics as well as neurosurgical outcomes data to really improve spinal care in the 21st century.
That's awesome. So very technical background, and now you're bringing it to medicine and to helping people get better. I invited you because you have authored the study about spinal and paraspinal injuries in minors in relation to weightlifting. So my audience is mostly strength coaches and athletes. So this topic is very dear to us. We want to know more about the injuries and how they happen and how to treat them and so on to keep the athletes, the lifters, lifting. Let's start with some kind of definition what spinal and paraspinal injuries are, and then we can bring the details of the study.
Right. So spinal and paraspinal injuries are injuries either to the spine itself or to the muscles and the soft tissues that surround the spine. So you can think on a simpler level, things like sprains and strains, but you can also have things like disc herniation. You can have irritation or injury to the nerves around the neck as well as the back. So the paraspinal muscles are really important and we showed this in some of the papers that we cited in our article, but they've been shown to be really crucial for especially compound lifts like squats or deadlifts to stabilizing the spine as you lift. And so even walking around day to day, your paraspinal muscles are always working to kind of keep you upright as well as, your core muscles, your abdominal muscles. But especially during heavy lifting, if the biomechanics of the spine is compromised or, there's too much weight such that, the lifter is, compromising proper form, then these paraspinal muscles can also be, injured or overloaded.
Why did you decide to do this study?
Right. So, I mean, as I'm sure you know as well, the kind of lifting culture, with things like social media, high school athletics, just the whole culture is really growing. And there's kind of this discussion out there about, whether young athletes should be lifting or what kind of resistance training you should be doing. Is this safe for them? Should they be doing it? And so a lot is actually very beneficial for young athletes to be doing resistance training. So it can help with things like being more resilient to injuries, obviously better body composition and things like that, as well as like bone mineral density for, growing people. So we wanted to really find out, the truth behind the discussion of young people, are they getting injured in doing weightlifting? How serious are these injuries? What's kind of the epidemiology behind that? And to see how much of a concern this is really on the national level in the United States. And especially because the spine is so important to, obviously everyday life, but also a lot of people have like chronic back pain later in life, are injuries happening to, younger athletes that could potentially be predisposing them to chronic pain down the line?
So if we know that resistance training is really good for people in general, but we also have to know how safe it is so we can promote it knowing that the net value of the intervention will be positive. So that's why the study is so important. Now, how have you decided to run it?
Yeah, so we used a database called the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System, or the NEISS. And so this database essentially takes reports from emergency departments across hospitals in the United States. And so with it, it basically gives a product or activity code so we could directly look up what reports to the ED are linked to weightlifting. And then it also specifies things like body part that's injured. So we could look up, the lower trunk, the upper trunk, the neck. And then importantly, it also gives a narrative, like a brief synopsis of what the patient came in, what their chief complaint was to the ED. And so we basically pulled data for patients under 18 that reported to emergency departments for injuries related to weightlifting. And then we manually went through these detailed reports of the injuries, and we were able to extract from a lot of these narratives, what exercise the patient was doing, as well as other factors to ensure that we were getting, the proper data points into our set. So things like if a patient dropped the weight, or like there was some, freak accident not directly related to just they were lifting and then that lifting led to a spinal paraspinal injury, we were able to exclude those as well. We pulled for all the data that was available through the database, which was for the past 20 years. So it was between 2004 and 2023 at the time. And another thing that we really wanted to look into was whether the number is actually increasing, because, we can see, at least again, like with social media and just like the gym culture, seems, at least to me, like it's growing. And so we wanted to know if that is also reflected in how many patients are coming every year to emergency departments. And that's another thing we analyzed.
All right. What have you found?
So ultimately, we found over that 20-year period, there were a little over 50,000 reports to emergency departments for weightlifting injuries in the spine or paraspinal regions in minors. So a little over 2,500 every year. And so we found that sprains and strains were the most common injuries. I think specifically strains were the most common. And between regions, the lumbar was the most.
Oh, sorry. Ben, could you give a definition of a strain so everyone is on the same page?
So the strain is either separation or a tear to a tendon or muscle. So a tendon is what's connecting muscle to bone, whereas a sprain would be to a ligament, which connects a bone to a bone. So in the paraspinal region, you can imagine when you're connecting to the paraspinal muscles, it's different, then you're getting more of a strain profile, which is, is why that is most common. But yeah, so we found that strains, and specifically in the lumbar region, were the most significant portions of the cohort that reported. And among the injuries that we identified and the exercises that patients were doing with these injuries, we found that the back squat was actually the biggest culprit for injuries. And so we found that 63% of the injuries were in the lumbar spine compared to injuries in the cervical spine or the neck and thoracic spine. And by exercises, squats made up around 46% of the injuries coming into the ED. And then around 30% were from deadlifts, and then another 8% were from bench. And then a number of other smaller percentages for different exercises.
The weightlifting injuries specified in the database are any injuries related to lifting weights. So it could be lifting dumbbells in a commercial gym, not necessarily doing powerlifting specific training or Olympic weightlifting specific training.
Right, correct. So it could be recreational, it could be someone lifting at home, it could be someone lifting at a commercial gym or at a powerlifting competition. So kind of all those are collated into this database in our specific search query.
Right.
So encouragingly, the number or the estimates of emergency department visits over the 20-year period did not increase. So that's, encouraging that we're not seeing a drastic increase due to, maybe like social media, but there's also potential that, more urgent care clinics pop up, more, sports specific places pop up. So maybe emergency departments are getting less visits now for these type of injuries than maybe they would have 10 or 20 years ago. And the other thing that we found, so like I said, strains and sprains were among the most common injuries, but things like disc herniation, things like sciatica or vertebral fracture were actually extremely uncommon in the database. And so while it's not necessarily that means we shouldn't care about them, but it's happening to a lot lesser degree than maybe you would think, maybe on social media or through some of these accounts that you may see online. So really just emphasizing proper form for patients and maybe that has gone better and maybe a lot of social media influencers that talk about the importance of form or show young athletes how to properly do exercises is helping, which would be again encouraging.
Were there any differences between different ages? So, I don't know, younger kids had more injuries or teenagers had more injuries?
Yeah, so we kind of prototypical patient coming into the emergency department was around 15 or 16 years old, and most of the patients that we found were male. So there were kind of a few patients scattered. You can imagine, like on the left side of the curve, patients, that are 10 or 12. But most of the patients were really concentrated in that like 15, 16, 17. And so the average was around 15. You can imagine things like high school sports is where patients maybe are getting their first exposure to weightlifting. And another thing I think is important and why coaches stressing the importance of proper form and proper weight selection in these young athletes is that it's not just necessarily that they would have some sort of injury to their spine or paraspinal region and then that cause chronic problems, but also you would hope that these young athletes, even after, say, high school, as they go on to college and other things, that they continue to do resistance training because we know it's so beneficial. And so enforcing that proper form early on could also potentially avoid an injury down the line as they continue to use the wrong form. So we also didn't necessarily look at, how many people are getting injured that are, in their 20s or things like that. So really starting early with proper form in these young athletes is really important for that reason.
So the main message is that injuries are not that common and they are not rapidly increasing, even though the participation in weightlifting activities in children and adolescents is increasing, which is a good thing. We want that.
Right.
What would be your message for coaches and athletes?
And I think that from the literature as well, and that we, talk about in our article, there's a lot of studies that really show how even more recreationally, and not even in strength sports, but just for young athletes, just even more casually getting involved with weightlifting, how beneficial that can be. And I guess stressing specifically very explicit demonstration of form and I think in strength sports, but even in, other spaces influenced by social media to not, like ego lift is a term that's thrown around a lot, but kind of focusing on doing the proper form and really getting to enjoy the sport as well without, this excessive concern over how much weight you're doing that could potentially predispose you to an injury if you have to sacrifice the mechanics of the movement. So really focusing on the mechanics of the movement is really important for that.
I think that's the hardest bit of strength and lifting in general. It's fun to lift heavy. It's exciting to attempt PB. So balancing the fun of it with the long-term safety and development of the athlete, that's always
Exactly.
a tricky bit. Yes.
Yeah.
2 short questions to finish. The first one is, what is your favorite exercise?
I would say probably the squat, like back squat. I think just the kind of procedural aspect of it and the kind of coordination of it, as well as it really at least for me personally, I feel like I can like channel the most effort into the exercise than like anything else. And it really feels like you're, giving it your all to during squats compared to anything else. But yeah, I mean, I just really enjoy that and, getting to continuing to do more and all those things. But what about you?
Ooh, I like squats too, especially back squat. For the same reason, it allows you to just stay in the effort. It's not too long, not too short, and you can really do your best. Whatever the day is and how you feel, squats will focus you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely does feel that way.
All right, and the last question is where people can find you on the internet if they want to follow your work, see what you up to in your research, or maybe ask a question.
Yeah, so I encourage people to find me on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Ben Carnovale, and then also our group as a whole, SCOLI, so SCOLI, scoli.org is our entire research group under Dr. Agarwal and Dr. Hamilton, who are both spine surgeons. And, our group has a lot of different research that we do. So I encourage you to look us up. And then our our email for that entire group where you can get a hold of us is research@scoli.org. So we encourage you to reach out if you have a question about our study or, another aspect of our research, or if you're just generally interested. We'd love to hear from you.
Excellent, Ben. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate you having me on.